What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the TDR Devy Show. I am your host, Kevin Coleman. I'm here with my buddy, co-host Jay Stein, and we're talking 2027 rankings. We're going through our rankings update. We did this with the other classes, so we're talking about guys who have shot up at each position and who have unfortunately kind of shot down the rankings, kind of talking about overall just our case with the class. And what we'll talk about is how fun this wide receiver group is. This is one of the better wide receiver classes that we've seen doing this for as long as we've been doing. But then as also, as always, we're going to be talking about some dynasty values too. We're going to be talking about what those pick values are worth right now if you want to add those picks to some trades and some 2027 trades here on the show for the new episode. All right, had to throw in a Ryan Williams kill everybody picture for the graphic. If you listen to the podcast, go check it out on YouTube there. All right, so as far as I said, like I said in the intro, wide receivers have been great. The other positions hit or miss there, and this is a 2027 class for the quarterbacks. One thing that to note about the 2027 class, we have seen some production from these quarterbacks, unlike last year's class of their freshman year. We didn't see a lot of guys get out there right away. So there are things to kind of talk about. Now we're going to spotlight one, but some other guys here. So Dylan Raiola's at the one spot right now from Nebraska. Up and down year. We'll dive into that. We'll kind of talk about the numbers there. Up and down season. DJ Lagway, incomplete season, banged up, has shown flashes of that talent of that top 5 quarterback in the class. Julian Sayin has not played yet. So Julian Sayin has not been out there, but that's also based on projections of like what he can be for Ohio State. There was a lot of talk about him pre-season in spring, kind of how good he was. And Damon Williams is a little guy like from Washington. He hasn't got a ton of run in. He's had some spot games where he's kind of ran the football, but he is fun there. Best of the rest, Luke Kromenhoek, who's been struggling a little bit at Florida State, but I don't know if I blame him as much as I blame that system. Ethan Grunkemeyer hasn't really kind of been out there. CJ Bailey's been out there. We'll get into that. Will Ham and Walker Wright. There's some other guys also as like best of the rest there. Isaac Wilson comes to mind. Possibly Michael Hawkins Jr., Marcel Reed, Michael Van Buren. Some of those guys are still out there. But what is your initial takeaway from the 27 class of the quarterbacks, Jay?
Well, like you said, it's just the fact that we have a couple of quarterbacks that are actually playing, which is nice to see. DJ Lagway seems to be off to a really, really good start. He came in halfway through the season after an injury at the quarterback position. And, his profile is pretty good. He's 5-star recruit, very physical profile, 6'3", 239 pounds, 19.2 years old. He has a high PFF pass grade, which is nice. He has the highest PFF pass grade of this group so far. He's also top in the nation of a couple categories in all of college football. So he's 6th in adjusted yards per attempt. At 10.2 yards, and he's first overall in big-time throw percentage with 10% of his throws qualifying as big-time throws, which is really good. So, that's a really good prospect that we have that's actually out there doing something that's hitting some of these metrics. And we're going to spotlight here Dylan Raiola, but I'm excited about Julian Sayin too as well. What happens with him will be really interesting next year. You have Will Howard there, which is a transfer from Kansas State at Ohio State right now. And, obviously there's a plethora of wide receivers. We're going to talk about at least one here coming up in a bit. But, there's a plethora of wide receivers, and whoever takes over that Ohio State QB job is going to be sitting really nice. And there's 2 QBs that came in from this class. There's Julian Sayin, who I think probably has the most potential, but there's also Aaron Nolan there. And a couple QBs from the previous classes. You have Devin Brown and Lincoln Kleinholtz. And then you always have the possibility of a transfer there. But yeah, I think the fans, if you're reading the tea leaves, I think the line to starting next year is probably Julian Sayin if you're believing what's coming out of there, and that's really nice. They also have a recruit coming out of Ohio, Tavion St. Clair next year. That'll be a true freshman. So we'll see how that plays out. But if Julian Sayin was to be the starting quarterback for Ohio State next year, that'd be a really exciting thing to do because I think he has a lot of potential as well.
That would be, and I know I'm very anti quarterbacks in terms of Devy, the format or whatever, but I think Julian Sayin is the perfect buy. Like right now, just where he's at, like I anticipate what he could do. I'm in on that. Like, I really do think that you could really have him there be that kind of next guy in line, because I think he is better than the guys that they have there. Devin Brown, those other guys there, even Lincoln Kindholtz. Like, I would go after those guys, but I like Julian saying, I like the idea of buying him.
Yeah, I mean, well, from what we've seen from Devin Brown or Lincoln Kindholtz, it hasn't been that great, honestly. And so if it's Julian saying, if he's the guy, then that's going to be great for his stock. I think it'll rise pretty well.
Yeah, 100%. Now, we are going to profile Dylan Raiola just because, hey, we got to, when we're talking about him, just 6'3", 230. We know that, 19 and a half years old. He has shown flashes this year. 1,900 yards, 10 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, though, and they've struggled. Nebraska struggled. They might not be bowl eligible again. Somehow they're going to find themselves be 5-7 all of a sudden. So he's definitely been taking some freshman bumps there, because at the beginning of the year he looked pretty good there. I think the mistakes that you're seeing, I think his QBR is not amazing. He's definitely had some issues as defensive kind of figure him out in the Big Ten, but production, he's been out there. That's a positive. Can he improve on that? He's getting the reps that we need. And we talk about starting games. That's the big thing for me at this point with quarterbacks. How many games can they start? Can they get to that 20 or above, which is going to help their value? If they can get that 20 or above by their junior year, to me, that's going to help him. And that's going to help him getting out there and getting those reps.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. It's not always the case that you get QBs that start their freshman year, and so we're saying that we keep reiterating that. That's a pretty important. And for Dylan Raiola, he's started the whole year, so this is a lot of experience quickly. So that's really good. And like you said, he has shown flashes. So just some things to talk about. He's only 2 weeks. He's 19 and a half years old. He's only 2 weeks younger than Arch Manning. So Arch Manning was in the previous class. Dylan Raiola, 2 weeks younger than Arch Manning, but in the class behind him. So just something to think about there. So far this season, he's got a 63.6% completion percentage and a 70% adjusted completion percentage, 1,900 yards or about 213 pass yards per game, 10 pass TDs, 8 interceptions. This is a little bit disappointing. It's only a 6.8 adjusted yards per attempt. So, you'd love for that to work its way up as he gets more confident and starts pushing the ball a little bit further down the field, or the offense starts changing a little bit. 4% big time throw percentage, which is really good. 2% turnover worthy play percentage. Love that to sneak just a little bit less than 2%, but he's like at 2.1%. This is the part that's a little iffy. So he's got a 67.3% or 67.3 PFF pass grade, only at 58.9 QBR. Those are not great. So the film guys that are watching him, and the QBR metric, which is tried and true in sort of evaluating some of what the QBs are doing, those are not great percentile scores for those two metrics. His total EPA is only 56, and his EPA per play is 0.199. Not like anything too exciting, but the fact that he's doing stuff as a freshman is exciting. It's just he's not getting above the lines on any of these age-adjusted metrics that you think are predictive of future success. And you'd love to see that happen in the first year, especially with somebody playing. But at least he's getting the experience in there. And then from a rushing perspective, 76 yards on the ground so far, about 8.5 rush yards per game. Nothing to write home about, but he does have that like mobility to it. So he'll move in the pocket, he'll throw off balance throws and stuff like that, and it looks like exciting and fun. So he does have the ability to sort of extend that play and to fight through those pressures and stuff like that. And so he's intriguing for sure. He's definitely intriguing. I think him and DJ Lagway, I think is a very exciting prospect as well. Are pretty interesting for this class so far. But I just don't want to get too far ahead of the skis here. We're going to get a whole other group of people that'll eventually be starting of this class. And, you don't never know how these QBs will show up over time. We've had lots of QBs that start out well or start early, and then they don't quite make it to the finish line of getting to be a first-round NFL draft pick. These are promising starts. There's, like we said, for Dylan Raiola, it's been up and down. but we got some experience in. That's what we can say.
Got the experience in. I mean, I think with him, it's decision making. It's that youngness, that YOLO kind of attitude he has out there when he makes some of those throws. I think that stuff's going to get weeded out in time. But the idea is you weed it out now, and then he develops. So next year's still a big year for him. I still don't like. I'm not going to say he's QB1 for sure. I think that Saying can come in, or some of these other guys can also pop off. But overall, good season. Hey, he's got out there, he had that production. From a college standpoint, yeah, they've lost some games. But from just a production value standpoint, I'm glad he's out there, did something. Lagway, too. I think Lagway does need more reps as well, though. And I think that's interesting what's going on there in Florida. All right, let's jump over to the running back class. So a little bit of a different, when we're talking about the running backs and kind of where they're at. We've had some production, some of it out there. Nate Frazier kind of get a little bit of run last week from Georgia. Then we have Quentin Martin Jr., who has not seen much of the field, if any of the field out there at Penn State. But based on his, preseason, his spring game, there's been talks about him being next man up after Katron Allen, Nicholas Singleton leave. Taylor Tatum got a little run early, a little bit. Haven't seen much since then. Caden Durham's probably the guy we're going to spotlight, but the idea of just he's had some production. He's definitely vaulted up boards in terms of value. Jaden Bach, I think Bach, I don't know how to say his last name, but from Florida, people really like him. And you know what? This class is very incomplete because a lot of these guys just haven't seen the field, but they're still very talented. So Jarrett Gibson, been out there a little bit for Texas, still talented. James Peoples, still talented. When you're going through some of these guys, Matthew Fuller, David Goss, Cam Davis, Jordan Marshall, Aeneas Williams, Adam Muhammad, James Peoples probably comes to mind the most. That could be as high as like one or two. He's very solid. He's a stud for Ohio State. He's going to be very, very good there. So this is a lot of depth here. And if some of these guys hit, this class from a running back wide receiver standpoint is very, very good.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about the wide receivers because that is really good. But for running backs perspective, yeah, I mean, we have had a few guys. They haven't been the guys that you've maybe expected to like pop off. So like obviously Nate Frazier, but like Isaac Brown of Louisville has some stats out there. Wayshawn Parker of Washington State's out there, and we talked about Nate Frazier, Jaden Baugh is doing well. So, there's some nuggets in here so far, but really we haven't really seen, enough data out there to really make any big conclusions here from these guys. I will say, as somebody that watches all the Ohio State games, James Peoples looks really good. Ohio State has the two-headed monster there right now. And so those are the guys that are getting the carries. But when they run up the score and they let James Peoples in the game, he looks good. He looks really good. So I'm excited to see how that room develops next year. If James Peoples ends up being the lead back there, if the other two guys end up going to the NFL draft. Jarrett Gibson is an interesting case as well. He's definitely shown some flashes. He's definitely had some really nice games. You got CJ Baxter coming back from an injury. We'll see how that running back room shapes up. And then you have Jadon Blue. So how does all that, shape up in terms of who gets the carries and who doesn't? And Quinton Martin we have in here as well. We already know what Penn State's backfield looks like. Do all those guys come out or do some of them come back? That'll be interesting to see how those running back rooms all shape up because there's a lot of talent throughout all those running back rooms.
Yeah, no, and we're not going to highlight him, but Nate Frazier deserves a shout out because he's coming on strong right now. Like he just had those 82 yards against Florida, a touchdown. He's getting more carries than Branson Robinson. He's getting more carries than ETN this last game. Like he is right there. So like I think he is the running back one. He's still a value too. I mean, we just did a remock of the Devy classes with the 25 class involved. I think Nate went in the 4th round. I think. That's pretty good value for a guy that could be number 1 in 2027. So just for you guys out there to qualify, like, okay, where are these guys going? That's why we kind of did that. But the guy I want to talk about, Caden Durham, pretty damn good LSU back. Like, I think they might have hit it. He is a freshman. I don't know why it says sophomore. That's for next year. But 5'9", 205 this season, 81 attempts, 406 yards, 6 touchdowns. LSU is frustrating as a program because I do think they struggle with the running back position. We've seen this multiple times, like, hey, what's going on here? They've given him, he hasn't had a ton of carries. He had 21 against Arkansas. He had 100 yards, 3 touchdowns, his best game. And then he comes back and they give him 11 and 8 carries. So obviously some of that's game script, especially against A&M. But he did have 4 catches in that game against A&M. So he can catch passes as well. So you see that there, the 18, 202, and 2 touchdowns. He's been a riser for me. He's a lot of fun. I know he's small, so he's not definitely the BMI and the size there, but BMI should be okay based on how tall he is. I don't know where he's going to measure in at officially, but he's been a stud for me. I think that he's one of those risers for me that I really like.
Definitely a riser for sure. Yeah, averaging 57 yards per game. And if you add in the receiving yards and you go total scrimmage yards, it's 83 scrimmage yards per game. And he's got 5.6 yards per attempt, which is pretty good. The PFF grade is a 75.9. And then, when I look at the age adjusted metrics like yards per team play, dominator rating, receptions, market share, he's above the line in all 3 of those categories, which is exactly what you want to see for a running back in the first year. So this is starting off as a really good profile. You mentioned small, but he's also quick, very fast, a very high acceleration, pretty explosive. When I watch him play, sometimes it just feels like he's not running people over. It's not like a high missed tackle force or anything like that. But he's pinballing. He just bounces. He got the contact.
He's got the
bounce
Doug Martin, just not as big. He got the muscle hamster.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe, but so he sort of pinballs off of guys, and he's tough to tackle, even though he's sort of a smaller guy. So he's really got that speed to him, which is really interesting as far as an NFL prospect goes.
Yeah, no, I mean he does. A lot of these guys, I mean, talking about Caden, he's not that. What is that room going to look like next year? He kind of took it over, right? And Caleb Jackson was supposed to be the guy. Nope, it's Caden. And I think next year he's going to be that guy. And then with the other guys in this class, the running back class, they're, Jaden, we could talk about from Florida. Like these guys are very solid. But again, that leap from freshman sophomore year is huge. Like where they're going to produce, that new incoming freshman class coming in, how do they kind of play a role? Isaac Brown is one we didn't mention technically as the top 5 from Louisville, but I know he gets a lot of buzz out there. Like he gets a lot of buzz in terms of what he's been able to do. So this class is fun. Like at least it's not duds. I felt like last year was more duds. Like we talked about the 2026 class and like the running backs. There's more optimism for this class. I think there is like there's a couple of elite guys. I think Quentin Martin Jr., when he gets out there. Again, a lot of these guys are kind of coming in similar situations where these older veterans are kind of leaving, and then these guys might get that volume as soon as next year. But I do think James Peoples I hate saying this because I freaking hate Ohio State so much, but I think Peoples could assume that role next year as being their guy. I know they got a lot of backs in that backfield, but they love this kid, and he's looked good at the spot times that they've used him, and he definitely could be that next guy in there. All right, let's get into the wide receiver class. So that's why everybody's here. If we're talking about this class has an opportunity, and you're going to hear people say this, and people roll their eyes because every class like this. This is could be one of the best wide receiver classes we've seen in a long time. And just based on depth, right? So like we're going to go through the top 5 here, and I guarantee you, there's probably 10 other people saying some of these guys in the bottom here should be up here. Cam Coleman should be in the top 5. Nick Marsh has had a great year. Bryant Wesco, some people believe he's better than TJ Moore. JoJo Trader, he's got some production. Finally, we were a little worried there. Mylan Graham, Mike Matthews, some of these guys that haven't just popped off yet could definitely be in here. But number 1, we got Jeremiah Smith. I think we're both in agreement there. Ohio State wide receiver here. Yeah, I mean, he's the one in this class. But Ryan Williams from Alabama is right behind him. Kind of came back to earth a little bit. We'll get into them as the spotlight goes. Ryan Wingo from Texas. We're going to also talk about him in detail here at number 3. Definitely kind of risen up boards. Micah Hudson from Texas Tech. I'm going to write about him this week in the Substack. Definitely could be a top 3 guy, just hasn't seen production there. So that's the one caveat I have with him. TJ Moore, kind of similar to like Brian Wesco and these guys there. But overall, before we get into the spotlights, anything in here in terms of these wide receivers of the class as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, you want to be cautious about just sort of proclaiming that this is the best class ever. Like, I think we did it 2 years ago. We were doing a show similar to this, and we were talking about Luther Burden, Evan Stewart, Tech McMillan, Berrien Brown, and Antonio Williams. And we were like, this is a really good class, type of thing. And then, you call 2 years later and you're like, well, not all those guys really played out, but the top of the class certainly did. Luther Burton and Tech McMillan now look like they're still the top of this class, and Evan Stewart's still hanging in there as well, still producing at Oregon. So I would say that that being said, all that being said, the data that the top two guys have put out this year is phenomenal. It's
Yeah.
really, really outstanding at Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams. And I do think we have even a little something different than what we had in the 2025 class and certainly the 2026 class. And maybe something different than we've seen in a very long time, especially with Jeremiah Smith. So that's really, really cool. What I think is also interesting, there's some pairs here too. You have TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco at Clemson, who are both phenomenal and awesome. And then you got like 3 wide receivers at Auburn. Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson, and then you have this guy that's doing fairly well this year, Malcolm Simmons.
Yeah.
Which are pretty interesting that you're getting these pairs of recruits at schools, which I find a little fascinating that we haven't quite seen that kind of stuff happen before, which is interesting to see. We'll see how that all plays out. But how you value TJ Moore versus Brian Wesco it'll be pretty interesting going forward, playing in the same system, and the same for those Auburn guys as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, you're talking about it's deep. Like, and you know what? You screw people that say we can't say it's the best class ever. We're here to have fun. Okay. This is the whole point of this. Like, make fantasy football, make college fantasy, make college football fun again. Like, if these guys they have produced, though. That's the thing. Like, we're not based on hype.
Yeah.
Hudson probably and Moore are the only two on here that you're like, hey, maybe the production's not so much been there that much. But they've had flashes, right? Like, and with the depth there, like Malcolm Simmons, for example, from Auburn, we might as well just kind of get in. I know you wanted to highlight him, so we'll highlight him here before we get into the other guys. 6 foot 179. He came in not as hotly like, oh, hey, this is Cam Coleman was the guy. Really, Cam came in as kind of being that top guy there. And Cam certainly still can be. But what are we seeing from like Auburn wide receiver Malcolm Simmons out there?
Yeah, it's really interesting. He's certainly a slot guy. So he's got a low ADOT, high yak per reception. And then he's leading the NCAA in a bunch of categories. So like 5th in yards per route run. In all of college football, Malcolm Simmons is 5th in yards per route run, a guy that wasn't very high on a lot of people's lists in terms of freshman wide receivers, and he's 5th in yards per route run, 4th in first downs per route run, and 10th in yak per reception. So he's got an 8.8 yak per reception, pretty good. And then he's above the line for reception yards per team pass attempt, which is one of those important metrics that I like to look at there. But it's very interesting. Malcolm Simmons maybe was probably thought of as like the 3rd best recruit in that class. And he gets an opportunity to be the slot guy there and starts producing right away. So that's one guy you think of like an Antonio Williams at Clemson and what he was able to do his freshman year. This is a good profile all the way down, to somebody that we probably didn't have ranked very high is out there producing as a freshman. So that, another one that's pretty good.
And that's a guy too. Like if you play this format and you're looking at, hey, who are maybe some targets out there who didn't get drafted? If your league's not that deep, and when you have the incoming freshman coming in, this is definitely a sleeper guy, a guy that you can grab in the 2nd, 3rd round, probably 3rd, and hey, go get them. And there's some value there. Now we're going to profile these guys. Let's start with the number 1, to get into Jeremiah Smith. Jay's been waiting for this for years since he's been watching him getting ready for Ohio State this whole time. On the year, though, when you're looking at him, 45 catches, 765 yards, 9 touchdowns, averages 17.0. These are just the raw numbers. Rushing has a touchdown there. He looks the part from a film-based perspective. He's got strong hands. He's got aggressive hands. He's got great route running. He creates separation. He's very good over the middle and on the outside. There's not really a route he can't run, and they've looked at him early, often. And for an Ohio State team to do that, that just tells me he's one of the better players that they've seen come out of high school. What, from the numbers perspective, what are you seeing out there? You're in Buckeye land. And you went to the game last week, so you know all about this kid. How's he doing?
I have not been more confident about a prospect than I have about Jeremiah Smith in a long time. I am super confident in him being a very good NFL player and college football player. Just to give you the breakdown, I think he deserves the breakdown. I think we should all get to know every piece of what he's doing this season because it's special. It really is. It's special. So just to give you an idea, he's 6'3", 215 pounds, a 27 BMI, which is perfect profile. In fact, this year, he was the first freshman ever to be named an Iron Buckeye by the team strength and conditioning team staff at Ohio State. First freshman ever as a wide receiver coming in to be named an Iron Buckeye. So he has an NFL body type as a true freshman in college football. So there's nothing to grow into, nothing to worry about there. He turns 19 in late November, so in a few weeks here. So far, he has a 23% target share, 761 yards, or about 85 yards per game. He has a nearly 17 yards per reception, which comes out to be about a 13.4 ADOT and a 5.8 yak per reception. And he has 9 receiving TDs on the season so far. When you're looking at season leaders across all of college football, he's second in yards per route run with a 3.43, sixth in first downs per route run with 0.14, sixth in reception yards per team pass attempt, third in EPA per play, eighth in PFF receiving grade. As a true freshman, he is dominating college football and dominating the Ohio State wide receiver room with some really talented other guys in the room as well. So, obviously he's beating those age-adjusted metrics on reception yards per team pass attempt, weighted dominant, and EPA play for his first year. That looks great. He's pacing to finish the regular season with about 1,000 reception yards and 12 TDs. So that puts him up with some of the better freshman performances that we've seen from some of the best NFL prospects that we've ever seen. So if you think of Julio Jones in 2008, he had 58 receptions, 924 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Clearly, Jeremiah Smith already has 12 touchdowns, and we still have 3 more games left. I'm sorry, he already has 9 touchdowns, and we only have 3 more. We already have 3 more games left. Amari Cooper in 2012, 59 receptions, 1,000 yards, 11 touchdowns. Corey Davis in 2014, 78 receptions, 1,400 yards, 15 touchdowns. And the other one I'll point out is Xavier Worthy in 2021, had 62 receptions, 981 yards, and 12 touchdowns. So that's the type of performance we're getting. It's one of the better wide receiver true freshman performances that we've seen in some time. So it's exciting. I was at this Purdue game this last weekend, and I saw him break 2 freshman receiving records, both of them held by Chris Carter, and he had one previously already broke. So he broke the freshman receiving records from Chris Carter. Chris Carter had all these records for quite some time now. In receptions, receiving yards, and receiving TDs. 2 of those he broke just this past weekend with 3 games left to go in the regular season. And presumably quite a few more into the playoffs as well.
Yeah.
So just an absolutely phenomenal performance. Like I said, I haven't been as confident about a prospect, especially this early, as I have been in Jeremiah Smith. Lock him in to 1.01 pretty much everywhere. This guy is special. I'm so excited about what he can be in the NFL.
I'm glad you said that. It's a good segue, and you didn't do it on purpose. But so when we put the Devy mock that we did, Ryan Williams went 101 in terms of the whole thing. So out of every prospect out there in college football right now, Jeremiah Smith went 101. Ryan Williams went 102, I believe. So with Jeremiah Smith being at 101, so that's ahead of Ginty, Tet, Luther, Emeka, all those guys. I did have someone in the comments ask me, they felt like him over Ginty was a bad move because of what Ginty's been able to do on the field this year. But to me, when I look at it this way, if I'm in a startup, I'm taking Jeremiah Smith because I don't see any scenario where he's not the 101 for the next 2 years. Do you?
No.
Unless a quarterback just pops off like Arch or one of those guys.
You have Arch.
Yeah.
I think Arch is the one where we can say, super flex, you value the QBs. Arch, when he was playing, put up really good stats, really good statistics. And so I think he'll probably be a good pro too and good NFL player, but there's still uncertainty in that QB position about how it develops and how it plays out. There's been lots of guys. We were super high on Jackson Arnold and Nico, and you saw what happened the next year with all the expectations on that. And I'm not saying that happens to Arch.
What about Ginty? Because the whole part about Ginty, what would you do there?
No, so I like Genti. I think Genti is a tier 1 NFL
Hmm.
prospect for running back. The positional value between running back and wide receiver, I would 100 times over always pick the positional premium from a wide
Yeah.
receiver perspective. From a purely valuation standpoint, running backs have fallen off quite a bit over
Mhm.
time. They've trended downward, not only in the NFL, the way the NFL values them, but even in fantasy, the way the fantasy has valued these guys. The wide receivers that are at the very top of the spectrum, they trade like quarterbacks trade on the market. Running backs, there's always just this discount. Even the B. John Robinsons, the Brees Halls, the Jameer
Mm,
Gibsons, there's a discount by 200, 300, 2,000, 3,000 KTC points over time between the premium wide receivers and the premium running backs. And that doesn't mean that necessarily has to be that way forever. But right now in the landscape, the way things work, the other thing I'd say is there's, less of an injury risk with wide receivers than there are with running backs. Running backs, you take the pounding, you take
yeah.
the hits. There's, in order to be relevant in fantasy football, a lot of times you have to be the bell cow of an offense. And for wide receivers, you can have one or two, depending on who your quarterback is in the system you play in, to one or two players that you can share the load. So there's lots of different arguments that you can make to why you should value a wide receiver versus the running back. But it kind of goes against a lot of the things that I like preach, which is like you have a little safety in terms of Ashton Jeanty because he's closer to being the NFL and he's putting up a historic season himself. But what we're seeing out of Jeremiah Smith, like I said, I haven't been as confident about a prospect as this starting as your freshman year. So yeah, I definitely picked Jeremiah Smith over Ashton Jeanty, even though regardless of how great a season Ashton Jeanty is having right now.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I'm there with you with Jeremiah. I would be hard pressed to say that like Jeremiah is going to go 1-on-1 in every draft starting from now until next season. Like it just is what it is. Like in terms of this format, even over Genty, I would not take Genty over Jeremiah Smith. Now let's get into Ryan Williams. Obviously, as these spotlights are going to get a little shorter, everybody out there listening, Jay, let's want to talk about Jeremiah a little bit there. But Ryan Williams had a good year too. You know, when you're thinking of him, he's 17. For everybody that doesn't know, that's been brought up a ton of times. So I just want everybody to know this. But smaller guy, 6'4", 175 in terms of what compared to Jeremiah. But pretty good. 37 catches, 731 yards. You see that big average. He's a big play threat there that you like from a receiver. 7 touchdowns. I think that there was a little bit of a lull with him. Like I think teams started figuring him out a little bit. So they talked about that. I read an article where the coaching staff understood like, hey, they're kind of coming out of this kid. They're really bracketing him against South Carolina. They did a good job against him there. But against LSU, he only had 29 yards and 2 catches as well. So he's kind of not done as well down the stretch of this season, but we'll see. He has some big games coming up where he's at to see if Alabama can make the playoff, because right now the SEC is a mess right now with where their records are. So he's got Mercer. He should do well against them. Oklahoma, Auburn. If he finishes strong, he can get to that 1,000 yards, and then you're still talking about him being a top 5 asset in this format.
Yeah, I like Ryan Williams. What he's done so far has been almost on par with Jeremiah Smith. The difference is, I think his physical profile is slightly different than what Jeremiah Smith is. So at 175 pounds is less than 24 BMI, and then you just worry. I mean, there's no question that he's producing, so we don't have a problem with that. But like Devonta Smith produced and won the Heisman at Alabama, and he's not that small. But I guess my question is, does he develop? Does he bulk up? Or does he get bigger? And fill out a bit and become more of that NFL profile? That'll be an interesting watch item over the time, and that's sort of stats wise, it's hard to parse these two out. I mean, there's a little bit more to like about Jeremiah Smith, but there's also things that you like about Ryan Williams' profile versus Jeremiah Smith. So don't get me wrong here. There's a lot to like about his profile. It's just, from an NFL wide receiver perspective, does his physical frame turn into something that's very usable for the NFL? I think that'll be an interesting watch item. He's like everybody knows, he's a little bit younger in this class. So we'll see how that develops over time. Some other things, I mean, he has a higher target share. He's 26% target share at Alabama. So he's, technically a bigger part of this offense from a target share perspective when they're passing the ball at Alabama, which is good. That's great to see. He's got a nearly 20 yards per reception number in there, and that's broken down with a 15 ADOT and an 8.6 yak per reception. So 15 for ADOT is really high, and an 8.6 yaks per reception is really high. And then a 20 yards per reception is really, really high. So that is like some numbers that you don't see very often, especially coming out of freshman. That's pretty outstanding for him this season so far. And season leaders wise, he's 6th in yards per route run. We have two or three guys, maybe 4 guys, freshmen, that are leading all of college football on a yards per route run basis. These are really great numbers coming out of these freshmen. 4th in reception yards per team pass attempt, and he's above the line on all those age-adjusted metrics that I talked about before. So this is a really, really great profile. I love these 2 guys at the top. These are my two favorite in this class so far, and the production there is really showing out. So I'm really excited about these guys.
Yeah, no, they definitely have. When you're looking at Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith, the talk with Ryan, he's going to have to probably put a little bit of strength. The nice thing is, I think the one thing to note about Ryan is that he's going to be their wide receiver 1. Like when you're thinking of him, like he's going to be their guy moving forward. You're still going to see the production there. What happens with Milrow, we'll see what happens there. If Austin Mack's going to be there, whoever's going to be taking over for that team. But in this offense led by DeBoer, you're going to be talking about a pretty solid prospect there. Now, the one guy I do want to talk about Nick Marsh. Okay. So for Michigan State, Nick Marsh, we talked about him. I remember, and it's so funny because I did a Devy Sleeper article or something because Andy Pham, who does stuff for our content, he talked about Nick Marsh and really liked him. I said, hey, he's kind of a sleeper. Like, he's pretty good. 6'3", 209. And this year for a Michigan State offense that hasn't been amazing, he's shown that he's pretty damn good. 33 catches, 553 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He's risen the highest, I would say, of the wide receivers in this range. Like a guy that kind of was off the board a little bit in terms of his recruiting ranking, where he was at, but he's definitely helped out his draft prospects.
Yeah, he really has. 6'3", 209, 26 BMI. That's a very, very big profile for an NFL wide receiver. And so the big sort of profiles are really nice to see. Yeah. And he's producing very well. Some of these passes now, Aiden Childs hasn't really looked that great this season, but some of these deep passes with Nick Marsh getting back behind the safeties and the DBs look really, really pretty. He really throws a nice deep ball to Nick Marsh. When they're on really well, and it's something to watch, honestly. But yeah, I mean, Nick Marsh, he looks really good. There's some things to really like. There's some things that are, to think about, but all those age-adjusted metrics, the reception yards per team, pass attempt, weighted dominator, and EPA per play, he's above the line on those, and significantly above the line. Sort of up there with Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams in a lot of those categories. So, he's right now statistically in maybe a lower performing offense, really commanding a good percentage of the share of those yards. And from an NCAA leaders perspective, he's 8th in EPA per play against all of college football. So some really good numbers out of him. A really big dominant profile, and has the ability to catch those deep balls from Aiden Childs. And we'll see how that progresses over the year. I don't know, there's some time to develop here, but I think his data profile so far looks pretty good and probably worthy of a spotlight, even though there's some really good guys that we probably would rank above him, numbers wise. He's putting up some good numbers this season.
He is, and he's got the tools, and when you watch the film, it kind of goes with what you see. Like it kind of goes with the numbers that you're putting up there. He's got a big, I know Michigan State fans are going to hate this as they're watching this. I'd love to see him transfer to maybe a different program, possibly, like where he could be that guy. And maybe we see the production numbers go up a little bit, but he's having a good year. I want to give him credit for what it is. He's jumped up there. Now, I did make a show sheet mistake. We're going to talk about Micah Hudson from Texas Tech. He jaded all the information for Ryan Wingo. So Ryan Wingo's doing really good at Texas. We're not going to dive into him. That's my fault. But I'll talk about Hudson because I am starting an article on him, writing about him, because Texas Tech fans want to know, where the hell is Hudson at? Because he came in as one of the top recruits in the class. Some had him up there with Jeremiah Smith. Those two guys were going neck and neck in the recruiting class prior to Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams coming into this class. Ryan Williams obviously reclassified. Hudson was ahead of him most of the time, especially over Ryan Williams. And he just hasn't performed this year, like 8 catches, 123 yards, no touchdowns. Targets haven't gotten better. Week 3 against North Texas in that game, he did have 5. But outside of that, he had 1 registered target this last game. That's not good enough. And then when you look at just over the numbers, 65.7 receiving grade. You're looking at kind of what he's been doing. Yak per reception, 5.4. Just nothing great because he actually had, even his ADOT is 12.5, but he had 2 games, he had a negative ADOT, which does not really make you because he was a big play kid in high school. If you go watch his film, you're like, where's this kid at? He is definitely bordering on that super talented, but will he pan out type of player that we've seen. Damon DeMoss comes to mind. Some of these guys that we really liked, the kid from Florida State. There's guys that were like, hey, where are these guys at? Jurion Dickey, some of these other guys, why have they not panned out? I still believe Hudson deserves to be in the top 5 because his talent is there, and he has a ton of players ahead of him that this coaching staff really love, and they've reiterated that they love the 3 or 4 guys ahead of them. It just makes me a little worrisome because Ohio State also has guys. So obviously he's not the Jeremiah Smith talent, right? Because Ohio State has dudes out there. Like I would argue Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, those 2 guys would start for Texas Tech. So that makes me a little nervous when I'm like, why isn't Hudson getting out there? I think when you put that context in mind, that's worrisome. That's one of those red flags. I still buying in on the talent, but there's definitely a caveat here with big asterisk, what's going on with this kid.
Yeah, and I think it was probably about a month ago we looked at he had an injury or surgery or something like that before the season started. So there was a little bit of slow ramp coming into it. And then the OC or the head coach was super interested in playing his seniors and his veteran players and really working Micah Hudson in over time. You just love to see some flashes,
Yeah.
But one thing I'd point to, and you're completely on base with the talent level at Ohio State being different than what you'd have at Texas Tech. But one thing I'd mention is, you have guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., who wasn't able to get on the field very much his freshman year. Granted, the players in front of him were of a different caliber than the players in front of who Micah Hudson are sitting behind or not playing behind. But it wasn't until that bowl game where he just absolutely went off as he got a chance to play. And if we just have one of those games, if we have one of those games for Micah Hudson for the rest of this season, maybe in the bowl game or something like that, I think we'll all be really back in.
Yes.
But the point is that, maybe a little worrisome right now from what we've seen so far. And hopefully we just want to see a little bit more out of him coming for the last few games that we have here.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's the big thing. If he could just give me something I like there out of you. Ryan Wingo from Texas also, he deserves to be in here. I think he's in that category of in that top 4-ish where you're like, hey, he really kind of shown off. The thing about Ryan Wingo, since I didn't make the graphic for him, to note about Ryan Wingo, Jonte Cook is transferring, so he's out there now. It's like Wingo looks now even more primed to take over. I think a big part of his transfer had to do with Ryan Wingo and kind of the run that he got this year and some playing time out there. So that is definitely something to note as well. All right, let's get into the tight ends. Really, I'm going to be honest with you all. There is the tight ends have not been great. Jay even made me laugh because I was looking at the show sheet. He put classified as a wide receiver. I know that these 2 guys, so Caleb Odom and Carter Nelson, are classified technically as wide receivers. I don't know what to do because I'm looking at the tight ends and, Trey's Green, again, hasn't been out there. Elijah Lofton hasn't really necessarily been out there. There's Daniel Everett. He's out there from Temple. Decker DeGraff from Washington. Landon Thomas from FSU. I don't know a ton to say. Green's had a couple touchdowns, which is great. Odom seems like a fun talent. He really rides. We have Deuce Robinson for USC. That's probably what he's going to be, and he's going to be a wide receiver. So we'll say tight end for him now, but he's probably going to be a wide receiver in terms of rankings. I don't know. Not a lot to love about this kind of this tight end room yet. It's going to take time for these freshmen.
Yeah, I mean, generally throughout the course of tight end's career in college football, usually they don't have a lot of production, especially freshmen.
Yeah.
There's very few cases where the freshmen are really getting on the field and producing. It's really cool to see Trey'Dez Green get the 2 touchdowns. He doesn't
Mhm.
have a lot of yards, but he's at least being used in the passing game, which is nice to see. I really think Caleb Odom and Carter Nelson are promising guys. It's just what's the probability of them hitting?
Yeah.
Who knows? But I do think that they are promising guys. In the Trey'Dez Green situation, there's a lot of talent in the LSU tight end room, and he's still like making some waves. He's still mixing it up a little bit. So that's an interesting one for me. Elijah Lofton it probably has, I think, some of the better stats of this group so far. Him and Decker DeGraff and Landon Thomas probably have some of the better stats, but really there's not a lot of production out of most of these guys. So it's just the projections that we're kind of putting in that out there. Well, who's going to be the Miami's quarterback next year? There's a lot of wide receiver
Yeah.
and pass catching talent. I'm not sure, like maybe it's another transfer or not, but
Oh
Cam
yeah.
Ward certainly Cam Ward's certainly going to be gone. So, there's a lot of pass catchers in Miami. Maybe Elijah Lofton ends up being something. I'm not sure, but that's interesting as well.
It will 100% be a transfer. There's absolutely no one on that roster where you're like, yeah, that's gonna be that guy. Like it's gonna be a transfer at some point, and they're gonna have to see who. Maybe it's Miller Moss. Maybe it's some of these other guys that pop off.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's gonna be some guys in the portal that kind of shock us there. All right, let's get into what values are. So I'm gonna wrap this episode up. We're gonna talk about kind of where we're seeing values out there in Dynasty for these 2027 picks. So we went through them. I've had a lot of questions about 2027 picks, and to me, I'm buying the hell out of them. We talk about how cheap they are there, and some of these guys are cheap, right? So we have T. Higgins on here, and this is where they're getting valued based on kind of fantasy cow, keep trade cut rankings kind of combined. So that's kind of where I find these from. So these are from early first to late first, but in reality, no one really knows what a first is in 2027. The teams can drastically change. So that's more perception based on who is trading them and who isn't. But T. Higgins, Kyle Pitts, Jalen Waddle, Alvin Kamara, Debo, Chase, Xavier Worthy. Does anybody outside? I know you love Kyle Pitts, so you're probably gonna say that one. But outside of like, is there any guys here that you're like, oh, I would not move them for a first? Like, do you get hesitation on any of these guys?
Yeah, I mean, I have personally been a T. Higgins believer, so I think he could be I think he could be pretty good. The problem is he just keeps getting injured and whatnot, and who knows
Yeah.
where he ends up next year as well. So he could be on a completely different team, catching balls from a worse quarterback than Joe Burrow, across from a worse wide receiver than Jamar Chase, and some of that production goes away. So that's there's some concerns there, but and then Kyle Pitts, I'm probably the biggest Kyle Pitts believer, but if I could get Jeremiah Smith for Kyle Pitts, oh, give me that every day. A chance at Jeremiah Smith over Kyle Pitts,
Yeah.
that's pretty interesting. Jalen Waddle, if you asked me before the season, he might be fringe or close, but now
I'm out.
I don't know.
I'm out.
I'm
I am so
I'm
done with
still
Jalen
in.
Waddle.
I'm still interested in buying Jalen Waddle at a discount, but you just got to be very careful with the price that you're paying for him. You can't be paying what you were paying this offseason for him. You have to pay current market prices for Jalen Waddle, which is falling off a bit. And so
Yeah.
if you can get that out there on the market, then that's fine. But that's somebody that has certainly decreased in value. So I guess maybe T. Higgins and Kyle Pitts are my only maybes, but really, if I had the chance at Jeremiah Smith or maybe even Ryan Williams with any of those guys, so if I could get maybe the early first out of those, that I'd probably want the early first
Yeah,
from
I
those
mean,
guys.
if I'm looking at those late ones, yeah. If I depending on where my team build is at, I'm totally okay with that. Really, to me, the only guy is Kyle Pitts. I'd probably hang on to Kyle Pitts. If T. Higgins got to stop practicing because he keeps getting injured at practice. I don't know what that man is doing, but just get off the practice field, sir. Like, just come out with a hamstring during a week and then go play. These other guys, I mean, I'm pretty far in. I cannot do a Jalen Waddle no more. I just don't. I don't know. Like, I think with Tyreek whatever's going on there, I think he's having that. That offense isn't great. I understand it, but he's just too inconsistent for me, man. And if you want to kind of re-roll, get a 27 first, and then you could probably use that first next year to get by a better wide receiver than Waddle as you go, especially as people start really liking the class, the 27 class. I know it's still 2 years out. When you're looking at it overall, assuming it's next year we're talking about, there is still time to kind of move those pieces. But if I can get for Chase Brown, Xavier Worthy, Debo, like Kamara at the last end, like if I can just shoot that and like look at some of your pieces out there, one thing to look at is like some of the dynasty guys, like the running backs. And if a dynasty team needs a running back to get over the top, this is the time to start shipping some of those older ones and kind of churning through them. This is a good time to get those 27 first. They're cheap. Like, remember, you might be thinking you're getting a late 27 first for Xavier Worthy or Chase Brown, but then it turns into injuries to happen in a couple years. And now this team, like, it's a top 5 first. Now imagine if you flip Chase Brown for Jeremiah Smith. That is the fun part of the deals. Like those are the deals that you do. Now that's all league dependent, roster dependent, but I would look at some of those guys that maybe you can kind of pivot off of. If you're maybe not a contender, even if you're a contender, maybe you can kind of flip some production and be creative with your trades and get them. As far as trades goes, now Jay hasn't seen these, so I'm just popping them up now and he's going to work through them. There are some first out there, depending on the databases that you look. 12-team Superflex, tight end premium-ish, 1.5 on the premium for tight ends. So we have the first 3, and Jay will pick his favorite deal, the first 3, and then we'll work through it. 27 first for Kareem Hunt in a second, a 27 first for Jaden Reed straight up, and a 27 first for Josh Downs. Anything stand out there?
The one that I would do for very easily is the Kareem Hunt one.
Yeah.
To me, Kareem Hunt is worth some fantasy points in the current season, but probably not worth much in future seasons. And so basically I'm giving a 2025 first for a second with giving up some current production, which I'm okay with if you want to stream running backs or any of that stuff. So that's the one that to me that makes it very easy. I think Jaden Reed and Josh Downs are interesting prospects in the NFL right now. They've had some up and downs. I think Jaden Reed might be a wide receiver 1 at the moment right now. And Josh Downs has certainly had his spike weeks throughout the season. So those are interesting guys. I don't know if currently right now I go for the first. Of course, I'm going to take Jeremiah Smith over both of these guys. But if I get a back end first for one of those guys, then I would have a little bit of hesitation. So my preference would be the Kareem Hunt 2025 second out of that group to do for the 2027 first.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm not as high on Jaden Reed as others. When you're looking at kind of like where some people have him, I'd probably want something back though with the first. I don't know if I could just give up a first. If I have Jaden Reed, give me some type of production back because the first is a long way to wait. And if you have Jaden Reed, you're probably mid contender still. Like, give me a veteran guy back. Give me a guy like Terry McLaurin. I don't know if that's too much. You think that's too much? Terry McLaurin?
Yeah, it's probably too much. Yeah, it's probably too much.
It's hard trying to look at the rankings and dive into some of those wide receivers there. I mean, I'm diving into a few of them. You're really looking probably like a Debo. Like if you're hey, throwing a Debo, Keenan Allen, possibly maybe get some production this year. I don't know what he's going to be next year. Or you go like the Jalen McMillan stash type of route. Like, hey, give me Jalen and a first for like Jaden Reed. And then you just hope maybe there's a production there.
How about an injured Ayuk, maybe? People are worried about the knee, and if you actually get him back plus the first, that'd be pretty interesting to me.
Yeah. No, I do think so. I think that I think that's a good call. I think Ayuk is interesting. A lot of deals for Ayuk. I've seen a 27 first and Ayuk for Drake London out there. So like I've seen those kind of moves being made. The other 3, a 27 first for Dave Montgomery is, I think it's fair on both sides. The one I wanted your thing. If I can move Khalil for a 27 first, I do that as well. I'm not. Listen, I'm not a truther there. I do think the Bills can kind of maybe add to that room as well. But the one I wanted your opinion on was the middle one. So 2 first, a 26 and 21st, Jordan Addison for Nico. Where are you at on this one?
I am a big Nico believer, but if it was somebody other than Jordan Addison, I would feel like it would be a smash. Yes. So like, so call it a early second instead of Jordan Addison, then it's really, really close. I think, gosh, I don't know. I think if you're playing the probability, if you're playing the odds, you probably take the two firsts and a second for Nico, because that's like a QB trade level value trade that you're getting for Nico Collins. And the odds are that Nico Collins is probably performs differentiated fantasy points for you at wide receivers for a couple years, but the odds are that it doesn't last forever, and you can create a lot of value with the firsts as well. The only thing that I would say is, a lot of times if I give up that guy that gives up the differentiated production, so Nico giving you 20 plus fantasy points per game, gives you so much differentiated wide receiver production that a lot of times you want to get the first, maybe another first, but you want to get like a really high upside type of guy as well. So this is where it'd be nice in Devy, where you could put in a Devy player here or something like that, which would be really good. I'm not necessarily like just like I feel like I'm coming off as like a Jordan Addison hater here, and it really could have been some other name here that if, like I said, a second or some sort of Devy player, and that would make it much more appealing to me. It just I'm a little lower on Jordan Addison at the moment right now. So, but I really like Nico Collins, but I think that at some point there's just like, once you get to 2 first rounds plus a second round, you start getting to that point where you can really create a lot of value with that. Versus, holding on to Nico Collins and playing him on your team. I think it also depends on your, perspective. Are you rebuilding? Are you competing?
Yeah.
And, it could be a win-win based on, if you can match two of those teams together. But what are your thoughts? So would you take Nico or the 2 firsts and a second?
Oh, it's close. I would take Nico. I think I don't like Addison at all. I mean, he's getting valued at wide receiver 33 right now, so that tier is kind of weird for me. Like, where I'm like, I wouldn't, if I can give up 2 firsts and Jordan Addison for Nico, but I think it's incredibly fair. Like, I think that it's like, hey, I get it from both sides of the perspective. I always look at this though, like when we talk about production and we're talking about like fantasy points and score, like, because value doesn't win you championships, everybody. Like, I'm gonna tell you this now. Like, and Jay's not a big value. Like, he's a big value guy, but he understands what wins leagues. Like, there are some out there that just say, oh, this is the value, go do it. This is the value. Like, Nico's going to score you points. He's out there. That offense needs him back. When he comes back there, I expect Nico to probably average 20 fantasy points per game. Like, that's kind of where he's been at. He's consistently there. Where Addison, like, when I'm looking at this, if I can flip like a Nico for a player that I think has not equal production, because you're not going to get that if you're getting 2 first back, but a guy that could probably be more consistent, right? Like, if I put in there Terry McLaurin, and I could put Scary Terry, who's with Jaden Daniels for the next 2 years, and then get first back, I'm okay with that, if that makes sense. Like, okay, if I can get some production there, maybe it's 15 fantasy points per game with some spike weeks, because I don't necessarily think Nico he's not in the Justin, Jamar, Amon-Ra, CD tier for me. Like, I don't think he's in that game-changing tier there. You could put him with Malik if you want, Marvin Harrison Jr., Puka, those guys. But I don't see him in that like elite area production where I can be like, man, I can't believe I just moved that for Justin Jefferson. I can believe I can move it for Nico. So I would lean Nico here, but it would be more of like if I can get a player in that range. Even like, the veteran guys in that range. I just said I hated Jalen Waddle, but I wouldn't necessarily like with those 2 first with Jalen Waddle, kind of in that tier. You're like, for example, if that was T Higgins, you would probably take the T Higgins side, right?
Yeah, if I get the T Higgins,
And
I get a potential wide receiver 1 type, back end wide receiver 1 type protection, depending on his situation, plus 2 first rounds.
Yeah,
that's enough value to trade away the Nico Collins differentiated production. I mean, I believe Nico this year is about 17 expected fantasy points per game. But his points per game, his actual points per game, is well over 20 points per game. So he's outproducing his expected fantasy points per game. Last year in 2023, he was a 17 points per game type guy. So he's in his early work so far, he's significantly outperforming his expected points per game, which means that there's probably a little bit of reversion that comes. And, maybe he does end the year at 20 points per game on an actual basis. And that's where he ends up. But that would be him outperforming it. That would be him outperforming what's sort of expected. And generally, I kind of view that, actual ends up kind of reverting back to expected at some point. And so you'd expect maybe a little bit of fall off at some point because it's been so great. He's been outperforming by like 4.2 fantasy points per game, which is significant. It's one of the higher ones in the wide receivers. So, he's coming back. Was on IR stint. There was questions about whether he might come back this week. He's coming back, and if the rest of the season he ends up at 20 points per game, that's incredibly valuable to those teams that are trying to win championships. That is exactly what you need to win championships. And if you're gonna win, sometimes you need to pay up to get those types of guys on your team to go and win that. But if you're gonna get 2 first and T Higgins on a team, that's really, really interesting to me, and I would do that one.
Yeah. So that's just generally how we're speaking there. But I will say, like, there are deals out there for 27 picks that I would take. Khalil Shakur, David Montgomery, Josh Downs. Like, there are ways you can flip them there. But adding those pieces to the auxiliary pieces help. But I think that does it. We talked about the rankings. We went through each position group. This is we're going to have fun again. So this is a fun class in terms of the wide receiver position. Could be one of the best we've seen based on depth and value out there. But we'll continue to update this as the offseason goes, as the bowl game goes, as we see how they finish out the conference championships there. And as always over the summer, we're going to be diving into these guys, giving you guys our takes there. So we appreciate you guys. We'll check you guys next week.